Well, there's been a number of attacks, and they're clearly on Shia Muslim Afghans, typically also from the ethnic Hazara group, who are largely Shia, not entirely, but they're associated with Shia Islam. They have all the hallmarks of Islamic State terrorism. So, the sectarian aspect, but also hitting schools, hitting mosques, so hitting places that are absolutely civilian, quite clearly civilian, and also targeting schools is also a hallmark of Islamic State, and it looks like they're trying to hit the younger generation, and also that they pride themselves on having none of the boundaries that even other armed groups in Afghanistan have had. There are certain categories of people that should be off limits, women, children in particular, that are clearly not off target. So there's been a pace of the attacks that has just been deeply, deeply distressing. And the authorities now, as before, so now that the Taliban are in charge, and before when the government of Ashraf Ghani and Hamid Karzai were in charge, they don't seem either able or willing to protect these areas.
Kate Clark, has Islamic State claimed official responsibility, and what is the security situation throughout the country?
Well, the security situation's mixed. There isn't an active war as there was before the Taliban claimed power. So from that sense, it is safer generally now. There's no, there aren't front lines. There aren't air raids. There aren't airstrikes. The Taliban themselves are not carrying out suicide bombings or mass casualty attacks in cities. And there aren't assassinations by the Taliban as they were carrying out previously. However, that having been said, the Islamic State is still a problem. There have been cross-border attacks by Pakistan recently. The Taliban itself, despite declaring an amnesty for all those who were involved in the previous government and the security forces, there are continuing reports of disappearances, forced disappearances, detentions, torture, particularly of security forces, but also of activists, including women activists. Journalists are being detained and often beaten up. And then you have these bombs. We also hear occasionally of assassinations elsewhere of the Taliban and the groups who want to start an armed resistance against the Taliban. They're also mustering attacks. So, in general, you'd have to say the number of people being killed and injured in Afghanistan because of violence is way down than it was this time a year ago, but it has not gone away. And in many ways, the conflict is frozen. Afghanistan, you cannot say it's at peace yet.
So who has control right now? Do the Taliban, there's obviously a lot going on, but do the Taliban have control of the country in any shape or form in a governmental sense?
Yes, they do. The Taliban are in control of Afghanistan. And if you look at most of the other periods in this long, long war that started in 1978 with a communist coup and then the Soviet invasion, this is, as in 2001 when the US had its military intervention in Afghanistan and there was a new government then, these are probably the only two periods when you have actually had a unitary governing authority. So in 2001, of course, that lasted for a few years and then crumbled in the face of a Taliban insurgency. At the moment, the armed opposition, the sort of pro-republic armed opposition, as well as Islamic State, and they're very, very different beasts, they're taking pinpricks out of the Taliban. And actually, you'd think that the Taliban, which is it's a group that's always been fighting since its foundation in the early 90s, is clearly more comfortable fighting than governing. I would anticipate that they would actually prefer armed rebellion, as they would see it, to mass civilian disobedience. And the unhappiness with the Taliban amongst the population is there. It's not universal. There's many people who welcome the Taliban, but many others see them as an occupying force.
While we're still talking about the security situation there, seeing that there's a former general in what was the Afghan army saying he and many other former soldiers and politicians are preparing to launch a new war against the Taliban. What would that look like, and could it even be successful?
Well, I mean, there's two things. One, there is clearly unhappiness with the Taliban government. This is a conflict where the drivers of conflict have not gone away. The Taliban have taken monopolistic control of the country. They don't have anyone else in their government, and Afghanistan is a rich, varied nation. The Taliban are all male, they're all mullahs, they're mainly from one ethnic group. They don't reflect Afghanistan, and they've taken a very authoritarian, actually quite violent approach to governing, including pushing through very unwelcome rules like banning older girls' education. But what happens to that discontent? Now, in the past, eventually that's become armed resistance, and that might happen now. It could turn into civic disobedience, which looks more unlikely. At the moment, Afghans that are really unhappy, they're looking for a way out. They're looking to escape the country. You'd expect them to become refugees rather than work out ways to either fight or to organise politically. So there are people, including members of the former security services like General Sami Sadat, who are looking to open up the fight again. As I said, I think the Taliban will probably be happier with armed resistance that they know how to deal with than mass protests, mass demonstrations, which they're much more wary about. They're much less comfortable in dealing with.
Kate Clark, it's an increasingly saddening, infuriating, maddening situation to watch from afar. Worse if you're there, but thank you so much for your time.